I'm Dr. Thomas McCarty, audiologist and founder of Audiology Associates in Anchorage, and I've been in practice for over 45 years, actually. And I wanted to introduce Dr. Keith Darrow. He's trained as both a neuroscientist and audiologist. He's a professor in Massachusetts, published author and researcher, Amazon #1 new release and best-selling author, principal researcher on our current study. He's the director of audiology and research at Hearing and Brain Centers of America, research associate at Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary, and his publications have been cited over 1,000 times. He's the only researcher I know who best bridges the gap between research and clinical, making current research directly applicable and allowing us to help patients on a daily basis. And Dr. Darrow.
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. McCarty. I appreciate that. I am humbled to work with you and your team in Alaska. There is no better place for hearing healthcare up in your part of the country because you understand the intimate connections between hearing loss, and the brain, and how that can impact a person's overall social, emotional, physical, and cognitive health. So thank you for asking me to come here today. And thank you and your team for being part of this national clinical trial to help us better understand how we can help patients reduce their risk of dementia.
And we know it's evidence-based, so we're not just basing it on an opinion. What would you say your expectations are for the results of this study?
Well, look, any good scientist will say, we don't know, right? We're going to stay open-minded and we're going to just see where the data takes us. Now, with that said, there is anecdotal evidence in the clinic, and there has been some published research that has already shown that treating hearing loss improves cognitive function. We know that it increases selective attention, processing speed. So there are some hints at the data, and that is really what has driven this study. You as the only person in Alaska who really understands how important hearing health and cognitive health is, you perform cognitive screenings on all of your patients. And so what we're doing here, my expectation or my ask is, for those patients who are treating their hearing loss, we would love to get some data from you. We would love to get a baseline that shows us, okay, today, we'll call it pre-treatment data that says, here's your current cognitive state. And we're going to measure memory recall, executive function, visual spatial memory, processing speed, reaction time. I mean, we're looking at the entire brain and how it operates. And then what we're going to do is we're going to measure that at later time points. As I said, we don't know what's going to happen, but we would love to be able to show that treating hearing loss definitively, unequivocally increases cognitive function, and exactly how it does it.
Yes, and I can say that on an informal, non-research, just clinical basis, we have seen improvements. And I know at your recent presentation, your neuroscience presentation in Dallas that I attended, there were several clinics that talked about seeing research results or clinical results that were earlier than a year, which is when we have been looking at it. And so I think
Dr. McCarty, you just hit the nail on the head. So here's the deal, right? This is kind of how science gets sparked. I saw a trend in that my patients' cognitive scores were improving. You saw a trend. And then some of our partners in Utah saw a trend. Some of our partners in New York saw a trend. So here I was giving a presentation on what I've seen. Everybody in the room practically raised their hand and said, I've seen something similar, right? Now, here's where any good scientist says, well, wait a second. This is great, but it's anecdotal. And while I appreciate that there appears to be these gains. Let's get real data. Let's get real blinded data. I have students from my university who are going to be crunching the numbers behind the scene. They're not going to know who's who, what's what, and we are just going to see, are the scores actually improving? And if so, by how much or how little? See, we don't know until we get there, but you're definitely right. All anecdotal, or even better, all experiential data that we experience in our clinic says we're going to have a cool outcome.
Now, I know we're current approach, we're looking at 4 modalities with our testing and treatment. So we're looking at hearing, cognitive, balance, and tinnitus. The focus on this study is directly between hearing and cognition. Do you anticipate maybe in the future looking at the other modalities from a research standpoint?
That's a great question. And absolutely, right? You know, the thing, I feel like the reason I love science is because it slows me down and it forces me to actually sort of break apart these different factors, right? Because you don't want to do too much, because next thing you know, you're not sure what data is what, and perhaps this variable is spilling into this data. So I really like a one at a time approach. So right now, the focus of this study is how does treating hearing loss change cognitive function? How does it affect your memory? How does it affect your ability to make decisions? How does it affect your ability to process what's happening around you? And then in the future, there will be more studies looking at the impact on tinnitus, the impact on balance. Absolutely. That's a great question.
And we know, I think Johns Hopkins around 11 years ago had their initial study correlating hearing and memory and cognition. And I think this study that you're running right now will actually look at it in more detail. So we know there's a relationship. Now we can look at the specifics. And then that gives us more information from a clinical standpoint, what we can expect from patients who start treatment and maybe have some memory issues.
So here's the deal, Tom. Yes, 11 years ago, there was like a revolution. However, if you actually look at the peer-reviewed literature, for about 75 years, we've understood this concept. Now, let me just sort of lay it out. It's really simple. As hearing declines, the demand on cognition increases, right? That makes sense that as you start to hear less and less as you get older, you have to try harder. You have to read lips. You have to watch body language. You have to do so much more just to understand what others are saying. So as hearing declines, the demand on the brain goes through the roof. And that is what has always been known as cognitive overload. So it's like you're working too hard to hear, or my favorite analogy, and everybody in our age group will understand this. It's like driving a car 60 miles an hour in second gear, right? What happens to the car? You're going to wear down the engine over time. So we've known this for a long time, but you're right. Johns Hopkins published in 2011, like definitive correlation. The worse you're hearing, the higher your risk of developing dementia. It was that black and white. In fact, the numbers associated, if you have hearing loss, you increase your risk of decline in dementia by 200 to 500%. So they finally slapped a number on it, which was really like a shock to the system. And look, I've told thousands of patients, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. Because once you ask a patient that, the next question is, so are you telling me if I treat my hearing loss, will that help reduce my risk?
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, right. And so you're right. You nailed it there. I was waiting for you to jump in there. See, what we've discovered since 2011, now this has been published twice by the European Dementia Commission, who has stated unequivocally, 40% of cases of dementia are considered preventable. I mean, that's a shock to the system right there. And then they actually list what it is, everyday people like you and I, what can we do to reduce our risk of dementia? And both times they published their report, they stated that the treatment of hearing loss is the single most important thing you can do to potentially reduce your risk of dementia. So here, let's just follow the dots. 11 years ago, we now know hearing loss strongly correlated to risk of dementia. In the last 2017, 2020, 2 reports came out saying, treat your hearing loss, it'll reduce your risk of dementia. What you and I are doing, and practices across the country, is now we're diving in and saying, how is it that treating hearing loss reduces the risk of dementia? And so we're looking at if treating hearing loss improves cognitive function, improves memory, improves reaction time, that just may be the link as to why treating hearing loss can really help you keep dementia at bay.
I know there's been a recent study that said that 90% of those who have memory or cognitive issues have hearing loss. And so I was thinking, since that's the focus of this research, looking at it from a cognitive standpoint, we might access patients who are noticing more memory issues than hearing loss, and maybe not even be aware of the hearing loss so much. And of course, the testing might show otherwise once they're in.
So I unfortunately, I'm drawing a blank on the author of the paper, but it was 2007. I remember the year because, so many of us think, oh, hearing loss and dementia, that's a new thing. No, it's not. I already talked about 75 years of published research. In 2007, a paper came out stating really clearly that symptoms of hearing loss and symptoms of dementia are very interchangeable. And it's very easy to potentially misdiagnose a patient. And so I always appreciate when a neuropsychologist, a primary care physician, or even a family member says, hey, is it mom and dad's memory, or is it that they can't hear us? And I always say, first thing, rule out that hearing loss is not the problem. And if it is, start treating the hearing loss, because you will see almost a complete turnaround. You will see that person engaging again. You will see their memory improve. You will see that person you used to love and used to interact with. So I always recommend that first.
And I know the Johns Hopkins study has been replicated many times. To my knowledge, there's never been any research that shows anything different. So it's an unusual aspect of research because it's all very consistent findings. So it's once they laid the groundwork for that initial study in 2011, it seems like everything is followed. And now the current research is even saying, well, in some cases, that even if you have an early diagnosis of cognitive issues, there's a reversal that could be obtained with treatment.
So I think you're right. And I'm always weary of making definitive statements. And so you're right. It's 2022. It's not 2011. It's not like you and I are talking about a paper that came out last week. We're talking about a paper that a research project that has been published, peer-reviewed, looked at thousands of times 11 years ago. And since then, there have been consistent reports coming out of different labs from across the globe showing the same thing, which you're right, is pretty rare in science. You often see some sort of, opposing opinion or opposing finding, but not with this. The other thing I want to speak to is I'm always a little leery when it comes to the word reversal, but you're absolutely right that a number of studies, again, not just one, a number of studies have indicated that treating hearing loss can significantly slow the progression of cognitive decline and dementia.
And so
And
I
isn't
always,
that right? That's what it's all about. When it comes to those diagnoses, the goal is to slow down the progression as much as possible. One report even stated reduces or slows down the progression of dementia by as much as 75%.
so it really seems like of everything that you could do, it's probably the single most important factor to look at when you're
And
talking about it.
that's not your opinion. It's not my opinion. It's what was stated by the European Dementia Commission. Get this. No, look, if you ask anybody, hey, what do you think it takes to reduce your risk of dementia? What do they all say? I need to eat better. I need to exercise. Well, guess what? Treating hearing loss is 8 times more important to reducing your risk of dementia than eating right and losing weight. It's 8 times more important than addressing diabetes. It's twice as important as being more physically active. I mean, it's not even in the same realm as all those other things that we know. We just intuitively know from society it's important. Heart health is important, reducing diabetes. But when it comes to this, the most important thing you can do is treat your hearing loss. Now, why is this, Tom? People think, well, I hear something and it goes to the hearing part of my brain. No, not at all. When you hear something, the auditory system invades almost the entire brain. So when you make a decision, your auditory system's involved. When you see something, your hearing system's involved. When you feel something like an emotion, your hearing system's involved. It really, cognition, all aspects rely on the ability to hear.
Now, the current study that you're running, and of course, you've got clinics across the country involved on this, providing data. Our study contact online is eartobrainstudy.com, and our office line is 278-6400 for anyone who's interested in participating, which we welcome. And can you talk a little bit about the study participant requirements?
Yeah, that's a great question. So number one, you have to be over 18. Okay. Number two, you have to perceive difficulty hearing. So it might be that you're struggling to hear in background noise. It might be that you're not hearing things as clearly as you used to. It might be that your family is telling you, hey, mom, hey, dad, you're not hearing like you used to. Go do something about it, right? So if your friends or family are nagging you about it, if you're turning up the TV louder than others, if you feel like you're missing parts of the conversation, we want you, right? We want people who are interested in improving their health outcomes, who are interested in improving their longevity, their quality of life, their ability to function in society, right? This is what hearing does for us. So if that's you, please come be part of this study. Now, another group of participants, which I find this fascinating, we're also looking for people who have tried or who are currently using not so great hearing aids, and they're not doing as well as they think they should be. So not only are we looking at new people to treat their hearing loss for the first time, but if you have hearing aids and you're not completely satisfied, we welcome you to join this study also. And it's really simple, Tom, right? I've already told you about it. On day one, we're going to do this anyway, even if you're not part of the study. Dr. McCarty and his team are going to run a cognitive screening. And then we're going to do it again 60 days later, which you typically have an appointment around that time. So we're not even taking you out of your way. And then at 6 months, which guess what? Your practice asks patients to come back in around 6 months so you can take care of them, whatever they need. So at 6 months, again, we're going to do a cognitive screening. Now, each one of these screenings takes about 5 minutes. So essentially, what Dr. McCarty and I are asking you for is 15 minutes of your time to potentially give back and help the 50 million people who are living with hearing loss to reduce their risk of cognitive decline and dementia?
And we in our clinic here in Anchorage have been utilizing the cognitive view screening for about 3 years now. So and there's no question that the audiology organizations all suggest and recommend that this is something that should be done. And on the other hand, very, very few clinics have taken it on at this point.
Tom, that's always a bit of a shame to hear, right? So I'm going to give you the date. It was 2017 that the American Speech, Language, and Hearing Association adopted cognitive screenings as part of best practice. Yet here we are today in 2022, and less than 10% of hearing healthcare providers are doing this. But you're one of the 10%. That's what makes you and your practice remarkable. And that's why I'm always honored to work with you.
And so we know that anyone that's interested can certainly contact us through the website, which is ear-to-brain-study.com. Our office line in Anchorage is 278-6400. And we're really looking forward to finding out what the exact results are on a nationwide basis. And I think that, again, taking that bit of information and saying, gee, I think we need to delve into this is intriguing, and it's long-term going to be certainly beneficial to the patients that we're serving.
Yeah, I want to say to you and to anybody who considers being part of this study, thank you. Thank you for being part of this movement to help more people reduce their risk of cognitive decline and dementia. Look, the data is not pretty, Tom. In the next 27 years, rates of dementia are set to triple. This is going to crumble our healthcare system. Yet, if we can help somebody to reduce their risk, if we can help masses of people to reduce their risk, who wouldn't do that? Every one of us has been touched by dementia. I don't know anybody who doesn't know somebody who has died a horrible death of dementia and cognitive decline. And so here's your little way to give back. So I appreciate you, Tom. I appreciate your team, and I appreciate the great people of Alaska. And I can't wait to get my hands on your data, and I can't wait to come back up there. You know, I come up about once a year to see you and your patients. So I look forward to that, Tom.
Yes, that symposium is excellent. You're always providing current information, and we certainly appreciate you providing that here kind of at the end of the road. So
definitely. How about this? I'll make you a promise. I will be up there in spring of 2023, and we'll lay out the data for all the patients that have already been through this study. We will lay out the data. This way they can see it in real time. I'm always willing to share even preliminary data. So I look forward to that, Tom. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Keith, for taking the time to talk with us and go into more detail on your current research study.
Take care, Tom.